Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. No, your eyes do not deceive you. This is rFactor 2. Yes, because rFactor 2 has recently gone into DirectX 11 beta, I now consider it good enough in terms of image quality for me to start looking at it again in terms of making YouTube videos with rFactor 2. I have played rFactor 2 since it first came out back in 2012, 2013, and I like it a lot. In many ways, I do consider it to be one of the more realistic racing sims out there. I don't think it's quite up there in terms of physics, in terms of iRacing, for example. I think iRacing is the benchmark for sim racing physics today, and it's followed closely, in some regards at least, by Assetto Corsa, and then iRacing comes in someplace between iRacing and Assetto Corsa. If iRacing is number 1 and Assetto Corsa is number 2, rFactor 2 is about number 1.5, if that makes any sense. Mostly because of the tire physics that rFactor 2 has. As far as I'm aware, it's the only sim out there that really has properly implemented tire behavior in terms of core temperature, surface temperature, wear rates, flat spots, things of that nature. Yeah, you can get flat spotting in Assetto Corsa, you can get flat spotting in iRacing, but in rFactor 2, you see the flat spots, and for me, that matters a lot. It's not enough just for me to get a lot of vibration through my steering wheel, even though that's what happens in the real world when you flat spot a tire. I want to be able to see it too. Considering that I mostly drive open-wheeled cars, it really adds to that sense of immersion. So, rFactor 2, it's back, and it's in DirectX 11, which of course is very good considering that's now the standard for most of the sims out there here in 2017. However, what we're going to do today is not talk about DirectX 11 and talk about how wonderful it is and marvel at the great detail that certainly is available with DX11. What we're going to do today is reminisce a little bit. Many of you who have followed my YouTube channel from the very beginning may remember that I was an absolutely tremendously huge fan of the WCP F1 1999 mod that was out there for rFactor 1. I played the living hell out of that mod because at the time I thought it was the best Formula 1 mod that existed. And I think, in many regards, it was. CTDP had their 2005 and 2006 mods, which were on another level in terms of graphics. But the WCP F1 99 single-player mod had the best physics I ever felt at the time. Now, of course, all of that has since long been eclipsed, but for the time, 2005, 2006 being relatively new to sim racing, at least on the PC, that was the gold standard for me, and I absolutely loved it. What I've very recently found out is that mod exists for rFactor 2. It's not possible for me anymore to record videos off of rFactor 1 and show you what this thing really was because I use a different encoder now, and rFactor 1, as old as that architecture is just not compatible with what I use nowadays to make my videos. However, this mod being in rFactor 2 does leave us a very interesting possibility. As you can see here in the very, very shiny light bloom effects here in showroom view, you can see that this is WCP F1 1999. This is the, at the time, very photorealistic likeness of the Ferrari F399. However, nowadays, I think you will all agree it looks very, very rough. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're not here to talk about the details, the graphics, the positions of everything, the shapes of everything. You can see that there is quite a lot of improvement that could be made to this model by modern standards. What we're here to talk about today is to remember just how much fun it was to drive these cars in rFactor 1, and we want to find out if they're still just as much fun today, even though now we are very much accustomed to much better graphics, much better sounds, and much better physics. So what we're going to do next is take this car out to Montreal here in rFactor 2. The version of Montreal I'll be using, though, is a direct port from rFactor 1, so we have an rFactor 1 mod and an rFactor 1 stock track by ISI back in the day. So we're going to play rFactor 1 in rFactor 2 in 2017, and we're just going to see what's what in terms of, is this thing still fun? We'll also take a little trip down memory lane, I'm sure, and talk about all of the wonderful things of yesteryear in sim racing. Alright, so here we are at the garage screen at Montreal with the Ferrari F399. As you can see, it's a bright and sunny day outside. The track is very green, though, as far as I'm aware. I think that's what the real road settings are. But in any case, let's have a look through our adjustments that we can make on the F399 circa 2006 from WCP. Of course, this is a rendition of a car from 1999, but you can see the default setup values here. We've got our starting fuel there, 8.2 gallons, good enough for 8 laps according to the projections here. This would be our pit stop strategy if we were in a race. Of course, we're not in a race. I'm going to add a little bit more gas here so we can have some fun out there on the track. General settings here, the gearbox. Let's lengthen final drive a little bit just so we can get up to 200 miles an hour. Sixth gear is a little short. We can shorten 7th gear ever so slightly, though. And how about 4th? Shorten 4th slightly. Yeah. Anyway, you can barely see those adjustments, I'm sure, on your screen. I'm watching the trace there. In the x-axis, we have speed, and in the y-axis, we have engine RPM. We redline at 16,500 on this motor, so quite a lot of revs on this thing, as you might imagine. A little bit more steering lock we're going to dial in as well, because I'm running 1080 degrees of rotation on this wheel, and this mod was never designed to run anything close to 1080 degrees, because I don't think there were too many sim wheels out there at the time that the original rFactor 1 mod was released that could do 1080 degrees of rotation. As far as I'm aware, 270 was basically the standard back then, so effectively a little bit more than half a turn, maybe 3/4 of a turn in one direction was what you had on most wheels. If you had a Logitech wheel, for example, you could get away with having the 900 degrees of rotation, so 2.5 turns, but what I'm running here is 460, so it seems to be a reasonable compromise between what my wheel can do. My wheel can do now 1080, it's the Thrustmaster, but the mod can only really do 480, 500, so 460, that is about 3/4 of a full turn. Not quite 3/4 of a full turn, but you get the idea. That's what we're running here in terms of wheel rotation. The rest of the car setup, I'm not going to touch it because I don't feel like doing any setup work. The only other thing, we'll double check our tire compounds. We don't need the wets, we need the softs on this thing because we want to go fast. At least we're going to try to go fast, because I have not really driven this thing since, well, about 2010. So it's been a very long time coming for this mod coming back here to the channel and just coming back into the public eye as rFactor 2 now really starting to get its feet again, finding momentum, changing ownership of the game. They're now being developed by somebody else, so I think we have good days in store for rFactor 2. But again, this is not about rFactor 2, this is about rFactor 1 and just how cool rFactor 1 material might still be nowadays. So here we are in the car. It is switched on, and we're going to lower our seating position and move it back ever so slightly just to get things a little bit more realistic. Yes, I know the chief mechanic is waving me down the pit lane, but if you do remember the 1999 rather mod from WCP for rFactor 1, you remember that the LCD in the center of the steering wheel did show you information back then. Basically, it would show you whatever you had in the MFD down in the lower right corner, but for rFactor 2, that is no longer valid. That doesn't work anymore, so the only information you're going to get is through your dash display on the screen, as we've got there in the center at the bottom, as well as the MFD in the lower right. So I like to run this screen back in the rFactor 1 days. It shows me information about the engine and the brakes, so water and oil temperature, RPM, and then of course the brake temperatures, which on this mod, if I remember correctly from rFactor 1, the brake temps got ridiculously high. I remember many years ago, I made a video of it, very bad video, but if you wanted to find it, you could on my channel. I had an absolutely huge brake failure in this car at Monza coming into the Ascari chicane during a full-length race, and it did not end well for me because those brake temperatures, they could hit 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit at the end of the braking zones at Monza. So we'll see if that still exists in this rFactor 2 port of WCP 99, but let's have a look, shall we? Oh, yep, there are the sounds. Remember those sounds really, really well. They haven't changed a bit. Turn off the pit lane speed limiter. Let's see, how does she feel after all these years? Ah, yes, there it is, my old friend, you're back. Tires are a bit cold, that's not going to be flat out yet through Sector 1. Those brake temps, oh yep, they're really high. That bug is still there after all these years. Let's see, we could do with a longer 7th gear. We've learned that already. Do a lap at speed here, get some proper heat in the tires. Yep, they're already there. How about that? Yep, this feels exactly like it used to feel. No changes whatsoever. Let's see, maybe some warm-up issues still on the tires there through Sector 1, or perhaps I need some more front wing. We will divine that. Sounds are exactly the same. The car feels exactly the same as it used to. It is 2006, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, we've got a length in 7th gear by a little bit of a substantial margin. Those brake temps, they're still ridiculously high. Straight into neutral with the button. I loved being able to do that in rFactor. You got a neutral button, that's pretty realistic. And of course, you get an ignition kill too, which is sorely missed in Assetto Corsa, I might add. Those of you, sometimes you comment on my Assetto Corsa videos where I turn the car off at the end of the hot lap. What I'm really doing there is just dropping it into a gear and then dumping the clutch, so I'm stalling the engine. But here, no, you have a proper ignition switch. Off, on. That's good. I always liked rFactor for emulating some more of the car's subsystems accurately, and iRacing does this too, but Assetto Corsa is still not quite there. But let's go and let's make that change to the gearbox, because that is going to be very annoying. So we need to lengthen 7th gear, or should we just lengthen final drive? Let's see, final drive is as wide as it can be. We can lengthen 7th, that may be a little bit too wide. Let's lengthen 5th, no. Alright, we'll lengthen 7th and call it a day. Suffering a little bit on front end grip. So let's add a little bit more front wing as well. And head back out. And we'll start talking about this thing. Also, you got to remember that you can properly stall the car in rFactor. There's that front end grip I was looking for. Front wing did the job. I tell you what, I'm having no trouble whatsoever getting up to speed in this thing straight out of the gate. It's like I never left. See, coming down the straight, the water temp's actually dropping. So that's what we want. Very good. Straight line speed's also up. It's the second thing we wanted. We're going to miss the chicane by a mile. Brake temps, 1500 degrees. Oh, yeah. A little easy just getting up to the ultimate limit, but getting up to about 80–85%, no problem. There we go, that was flat that time. We have arrived. So thinking about this car and this mod and the time it was, the era it was for computer technology, sim racing was effectively a new idea back then. Yes, I know a lot of the purists from the Jeff Crammon Grand Prix days and the Indy racing and the NASCAR games, the company that later became iRacing, Papyrus. I know you're going to tell me, no, those were the first technical race sims, and you're correct, and we're going to miss the chicane again. Brake earlier. Yes, I know. Lap will not count. But two things were happening in the mid-2000s. You had the technology boom, which manifested itself in two major ways. Personal computers became a lot cheaper, and then you had cell phones and you had the internet. They were all concurrent things. So I guess three major ways. Personal computers, cell phones, the internet. Not in that order, of course. But for the first time, internet access was becoming available to the masses. Computers were cheaper, which means more people could buy them. Well, already a lot of people had computers in their houses, PCs, Macs, whatever. But they were becoming cheap enough to where you could upgrade them. And then we all know what happened. Moore's Law came into play, and then every 18 months computer capacity doubled, if not tripled. And then by the time 2008 rolled around, you had a whole bunch of dedicated graphics cards coming out, really, really high-end processors. So the architecture that started to exist for sim racing was coming online. And then it's no consequence that iRacing came along. And then the rest is history in terms of the sim racing market. However, before there was a sim racing market as it exists today, when you went and you bought a game, and this is not just for sim racing, but for any sort of computer entertainment, you went out and you bought a game. And for PC, you got a CD-ROM. Remember CD-ROMs? Yeah, I sure do. You went to the store and you picked up a box, and inside the box was a disc, and you put that disc into your computer, and then you waited 2 hours while it copied all the files and put them into the appropriate directories, and then you spent the rest of the night trying out your new hardware. and it was a blast. It absolutely was a blast. Back then, before the days of really high-speed, high-fidelity internet connections, there was really no such thing as online league racing, so you were racing against the AI, but you didn't know any better, so the AI were pretty good. Of course, nowadays, we look back and we say, wow, the AI just followed the same line around the track all the time. But back then, it was cool, because you could have a full field of cars at your favorite racetrack, and then as you got better with your skills, as you improved, you could then absolutely murder the AI, and then you turn up the AI multiplier, and then you start the process all over again, trying to beat them at their own game. And eventually, of course, as with anything, you got tired of doing that. You got tired of what was available in the stock version of whatever game you were playing, in this instance, rFactor. And it wasn't just you who got tired. It was a whole lot of people around the world. A whole lot of people with a whole lot of talent. So they said, in their spare time, when they would get home from work, they would say, you know what? There are some cool race cars out there. Let's make some mods. And they did. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where this WCP F1 1999 mod originally came from. Somebody, or some small group of somebodies, I don't know the creation story of WCP, but somebody, or a small group of somebodies, got together and said, you know what? The 1999 F1 season was absolutely great. You had Mika Hakkinen and Michael Schumacher fighting out for the title. You had Damon Hill out there, who was finally competitive somewhat in the Jordan. Heinz-Harald Frentzen won a few races. So you had three men for the title. The cars had V10 engines, these groove tires. They were slippery, slidey, slithery beasts with 900 horsepower. So it was a cool year. Let's recreate it. And that's exactly what they did. Also in this old time, a simpler time, if you will, there was basically no such thing as pay mods. All of your investment came up front with this. You bought the game, you got that CD-ROM, and after you installed the contents of that CD-ROM onto your, if you were lucky, 80 gigabyte hard drive, you had fun. And then you got to go play with the fruit of the modder's labor. And what a labor it was. As I said in the intro, I played the living hell out of this mod back in the day on rFactor 1. It was just so good. Everything about it was tremendous. The sounds were great. The graphics were pretty good for the time, believe it or not. As you can see, everything is coming together at pretty sharp points and jagged edges here in cockpit view. But back then, that's what your machine could do. And my computers, at very least, couldn't even run rFactor 1 at full resolution. So what we were seeing here was really, really good back then. The other details that got my attention, the shift lights across the top of the steering wheel, the screens on the steering wheel. You see, I've got a gear display. I have how many laps I've turned. I have my speed in the center of the steering wheel. And in the rFactor 1 version, as I mentioned, that screen down in the center proper of the wheel, I really need to work on braking at the right time, showed you information. So that was absolutely revolutionary for somebody like me, being 13, 14 years old at the time. So I said, wow, this thing is really, really cool. So I played this to death, and I got really good in these cars, and I got really good at racing the AI in these cars. And I started to get just a slight little hint of what it might have been like to be Mika Hakkinen, or Michael Schumacher, or Heinz-Harald Frentzen in 1999 fighting for the F1 World Championship. And thus the seed was planted. Screaming down the straight here, popping 7th gear, approaching 200 miles an hour. We'll brake now, so we can be sure we make the chicane, and we do, even though we missed the first apex. Getting as close as we dare to the wall of champions, which unfortunately may be leaving us in 2018. Feels very strange to be talking about 2018 playing a mod that is 10 years old. But nonetheless, is it still fun? Is it still something that I could get home from work and think about, you know, maybe I want to turn some laps in this car, in this mod, on this very old version of Montreal, which as you can see is not correct by any means anymore. Most of the run-out zones have now been paved on this circuit, but there's still grass and gravel in this version because, well, this version itself is about, well, 10 years old. At least 7 years old. I remember this one from 2010. I don't know if it existed sooner. I imagine it did. So even though it's old technology, even though I've got Assetto Corsa and iRacing, which have far better graphics and far better physics nowadays, is it still good? The simple answer is yes. Yes, it is. And it's good for all of the good or the right reasons as well. It reminds me of what it was, because this is more or less what it was. Sure, DirectX 11 now running this thing. rFactor 2 running this thing. So some of the things that you see look superficially a little bit different. You've got these light bloom effects that are coming off of all of the flat surfaces on the car, coming from the shift lights, coming from the display on the steering wheel. That's an artifact of DirectX 11. That's not something that you saw back in the day when you ran this on rFactor 1. But the sounds are there, the physics are there. The only difference in terms of how the car feels is not down to the physics themselves, it's down to the tire model in rFactor 2. Essentially, the only thing that has been updated for this version of WCP 99 is that tire model, because all the cars on rFactor 2, of course, use that base tire model. So that feels a bit different. The car feels a bit more springy. I'd say the tires on all the cars in rFactor 2 feel springy. And to that I might say it's not quite as realistic as some other sims, even though I went on and on about the merits of the tire model in rFactor 2 in our introduction to this video. Sometimes the tires in this sim feel like you're just driving on some underinflated balloons. There's a lot of squish in them, if you get what I'm saying. But the flat spots, when you flat spot them, you feel it and you see it, and that is really, really cool. I'm overshooting myself quite a bit. Is that down to some brake wear, or is that just down to some brain fade on my part? Yeah, it's brain fade. So many memories come back in this car, at this version of Montreal, rFactor. Remember what my life was like. It was before I really got into doing the whole YouTube thing. I was still in high school. I had no idea what college was going to be like. For the most part, I had never even driven a real car, so all of this entire enterprise was pure speculation on my part. I had never driven a road car before, let alone have any idea, did I, of what a race car would really feel like, what all of these inputs that I was doing in this virtual reality would actually mean in a real sense. But I saw it on TV. So for me to be able to interact with this sort of environment, as rudimentary as it is by today's standards, it was really, really cool. And I'm pretty sure that that's the same thought process that all of us had back in the day when we really started to get our hands on PC Sims, whenever that was for you. Those of you older than I, you probably did that a bit sooner than I did, considering you had the awareness and the means to do so. But for me, it was 2005, 2006. when I really got into the PC world of sim racing, and I never looked back. That's a flat spot. There is a definite flat spot now. Yep, and then, of course, when you get the flat spot, Martin Brundle's proverbial 50 pence piece, it always locks up in the same place. Some things that you notice about the mod that tell you how dated it is. Well, let's talk about the obvious. Just look at it. Look at what you see here from the cockpit. You don't see much, but what you do see is, by modern standards, quite painful. You can see the decals there on the side of the cockpit, which are, you know, more or less correct. There would be those decals in the cockpit of a Formula One car, particularly a Ferrari of the era. However, everything is just slanted at very weird angles that do not match up with the real-world contours of the carbon fiber monocoque, so you can see where the modders spliced in different textures and different panels that they put together in whatever 3D CAD software they were using back then. It could not have been as good as what we have today, that's for sure. Other things, though, that are not quite as apparent. You have the sounds, which for the day were very good, and even today, that is a reasonable representation of a Ferrari V10. But now, sounds come in many more channels, so there's much more depth to the sound. You can also get much better harmonics, and these V10 engines had some very complex harmonics going on. And of course, when you can recreate that really well in a sim, it adds so much more to that overall sense of immersion. Some other things that you notice, the physics, for example. The closest that I think we can come to driving a car like this in another sim would be in Assetto Corsa. The old McLaren MP413, which would have been almost a direct comparison to this Ferrari. Of course, the MP413 no longer supported and no longer compatible with the latest builds of Assetto Corsa, but that car felt a lot more free, and that's because, well, they had the groove tires, just like this car has. But that car in particular, even Mika Hakkinen said it was very difficult to drive. And yes, it's very difficult to drive that car in Assetto Corsa. This car, too, is difficult to drive, but not nearly in the same ways. This one feels slightly disconnected to the track. There's a lot of understeer in this car. But it's not because of my setup. Yes, I'm running default setup, but if anything, I get oversteer under power. The understeer comes in at the end of the braking zone and turning into the corner. Just the first instance of turn-in right there. That's the understeer. But then you're catching the tail the entire way out. That's not realistic. That's totally not realistic. Yes, these cars were very squirrely back in the day, as we mentioned with the AC version of the MP413. But they did not just switch like that. This car transitions between understeer and oversteer in an absolute instant. And even in the twitchiest car in the universe, there is a little bit of wiggle room between sliding at the front and sliding at the rear. Not here. It's almost like somebody has just flipped the light switch on the rear of the car, and all of a sudden the rear wants to dictate your direction of travel. That is a disconnect, and that is indicative, at least I believe, of the progression of physics and the progression of really processing technology for a machine to be able to make all of those calculations almost instantaneously and then emulate real-world physics to the best of its capacity. Big flat spot now on the left front. Oh yeah. steering wheel is vibrating like you would not believe. See the effects of that flat spot on the mechanical grip even at low speeds. Car's bouncing through the hairpin on the right front tire because it's no longer round. Again, that left front. I am murdering that poor piece of rubber. Overshot the braking by about 50 miles. That brings up another good point, though. Because this is a port from rFactor 1, this track of Montreal, and the mod itself is also a port from rFactor 1. The visual reference points that I've become accustomed to for picking my braking point, they're not there. Or if they are there, they're not there in the same way. And I think this has to do somewhat with draw distances, with fine details at the side of the track, because I know at Montreal, if I'm braking for the chicane, there are going to be boards. 400, 300, 250, 200, 150, 100, and I'll brake in a Formula 1 car there at maximum speed at about 110 to 90. You can see here there are no boards. No boards at all. So it's very difficult for me to pick a braking point, not only because there are no boards, but also because it's very difficult to see the apex of the chicane. You can see what I've done to the tires there. Yeah, the fronts are absolutely shot. The rears are fine. Fronts are shot because they're flat spotted. Ah, yes. Grip. Where have you been? Let's see, we've turned 20.5 laps. There's the mechanical grip I was missing through the hairpin. .5 laps now in this car after, at very least, a 5-year hiatus, more like a 7-8-year hiatus. Is it still fun? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We said that before. But is it fun in the same way that it used to be? Yes, it's making me feel all warm and fuzzy inside about how life was 10 years ago or so, when this was new, and it was the coolest thing I had ever seen on a computer. And it truly was. This was the best thing that I had ever seen in the world of video games. This mod, and particularly this Ferrari. Is it still the coolest thing I've ever seen? No. No, it's not. And it's always going to be an unfair assessment when we ask that question, because you can never forget previous experience. And nowadays, 2017 is previous experience with relation to this mod. So, unfortunately, I think we've all been spoiled, not by fault of our own, but simply by virtue of the passage of time, and the endless progression of technology and the endless improvement thereof. So something like this today, if I want one of those really immersive experiences, no, it's not going to give that to me, and I don't think it would be fair to expect it to. We're judging it on a completely different set of criteria now, and there are completely different sims out there like Assetto Corsa and iRacing that are far better equipped to give us an experience like that. But if you do want to pound around in a V10 Formula 1 car and not really care so much about your performance in terms of the finer details of it, let's just say you want to blow off some steam after a long day, or perhaps, like me, you want to go out and you want to reminisce about times of old, yeah, this is very good for that. In fact, that's about all this is good for anymore, I would say. It is a very challenging driving experience, don't get me wrong. You can see how much I'm juggling the steering around through the corners. This car is all over the place. There's no secret to that. But it's not the most accurate driving experience out there. Pretty much any Formula 1 mod that's out there for Assetto Corsa today is far better than this. Especially, for example, you have the V10 cars, the Ferrari F310 from 1996. You've got the F2002, the F2004. Now you've got the Williams FW24, which is, you saw my review of that thing. That's, that thing is just pornographic. And then pretty soon, VRC is going to be releasing the MP420 and the Renault R25. I can't even begin to think of all of the superlatives I'm going to need to describe those things to you when they do come out, and I do make my inevitable review pieces of both of those absolutely immense machines for Assetto Corsa. But this, a superlative generator of old, it still has merit. It still certainly has a lot of merit all on its own. For the time, it was absolutely spectacular. Nowadays, judging it by the standards of nowadays, it's woeful. It truly is woeful. But if you put on the rose-colored glasses and you squint hard enough, maybe, just maybe, you can still find the soul of this car and the soul of this mod, and that's simply to make something cool and then through the goodness of our hearts to give it to the world and allow them to enjoy the experience of a V10 Formula 1 car in this newfangled thing called sim racing, recreating one of the best Formula 1 seasons in modern memory, giving you the chance to pretend to be Michael Schumacher. And of course I'm not pretending to be Michael Schumacher because I've missed that chicane far too many times for my own liking. Let's go rearward on the brake bias. Oh yeah, that helps. That helps a lot. Let's go 50-50. You have to remember though, when you go rearward on the brake bias, look at the brake temps. Rear temps are about 100 degrees F higher than the fronts, which is completely counterintuitive when you think about it, but you think about it more, and then you say, oh, there's less airflow to the rears. So that's a point for realism. Also means, though, and this mod has a long history of this, you're going to burn those brakes up really, really soon. Yeah, going rearward on the brake bias certainly helps the turn in. Going a little bit more to the rear. 49.4. Watch that we don't lock the rears now. Yes, all the grass. Use all the grass. That's why it's there, no? Yep, more differences between the track of 10 years ago and the track today. The asphalt extends all the way to the barriers now in, I think, all of those corners. But then you just get on the power, you'll light the rears up a little bit, drop it into second gear, and then you forget all of your troubles. That's what this mod is good for. That's what this version of Montreal is good for, and if you've still got rFactor 1 on your computer, that's what rFactor 1 is still good for. It's been eclipsed so much by what's out there today, but it was the beginning for online sim racing. It was the beginning of the modding community as we now know it. And back then, it was all for free. And that was the true magic of it. It wasn't all about the technology. It wasn't all about the game. It wasn't even all about the driving. It was all about the birth of the sim racing community. And the sim racing community today, although it had humble origins back then in 2004, 2005, today it is very strong, very vibrant. Still so many very talented drivers, developers, modders out there. That's what it's all about. And as for my old friend, the F399, it's time to put you back to sleep. A very cool car you were for your day, and a very welcome reminder of how far we have come, but unfortunately, we have the technology now. It's been eclipsed, but that still doesn't mean that every now and again we can't go back and survey how far we have come, and I think when we look back at the technology of yesteryear, the mods of yesteryear, we can really begin to appreciate just how cool it is nowadays, and just how much we still probably have to look forward to in the future, because this is 10 years of evolution. And you can see, yeah, it looks a little bit rough by our standards. You can see the angles are really harsh. You can see that the exhaust there, they're not even modeled, it's just texture. It's a picture of an exhaust pipe superimposed on the top of the car, and the flames just shoot out of a random section of the bodywork for the backfire. But it doesn't matter so much, and back then, just the fact that you had exhaust detail at all was a pretty big deal. Nowadays, yeah, you've got individually modeled exhaust primaries underneath the bodywork that you will never see at all when you're driving the car, but it's there because it looks cool, and yes, it does look cool, and it really shows that the modders care so much. But using the technology that they had in the day, they still did the same sort of quality work, because as I've said multiple times throughout this slightly rambling video at this point, yeah, they cared back then, and they did their best, and they gave it to us for free, as many of them still do to this day, even though the quality of their work in terms of what's possible visually has gone up exponentially. The passion and the care was always there from the beginning, and as I mentioned out on track, that is the sim racing community as we knew it then, and as we know it now, as it has grown and really taken hold in this wonderful virtual world of sim racing that we all know and love so very much. I will leave you, as always with this type of videos, with a view of a hot lap without commentary of the F399 here at the rFactor 1 port in rFactor 2 of Montreal. So this was a little bit of a change of pace of a video, more of a commentary, more of a reminiscence, if you will. But I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, though, FerrariMan601 saying thank you very much, and we will see you soon.